My name's Vicki Weinberg. There's two of us in the department. Patty Pop couldn't be here today. She sends her regrets, and but you get me. So my dynamic duo, I'm going to have to be even more engaging because usually we play off each other. So today I just want to update folks on where we are in amending the SLD or specific learning disability criteria. It's a small enough group. Please make sure this is interactive. This is not a training. I really am coming back and kind of updating you on where we are with our listening sessions and kind of in our process. So in our process in 23, 24, legislature gave us rulemaking authority. We immediately formed groups and got after it, updating, looking at research, even usability testing some of our ideas within the community to see if what we got was criteria that was applicable, repeatable, doable, and would give us some more consistency. Then we came back to made our committee recommendations and submitted that we were ready to go to rulemaking. And then I don't know what happened. Time passed. I think we didn't have lawyers on staff, and then we had some other things that once we got everybody hired, so we ran out of time. The Legislative Rulemaking Authority is time bound. So this session we had to go back and ask for more time to finish our process. So we're stuck there for the moment. But Patty and I, in the meantime, have been going out with the recommendations and getting community feedback. And some of that has had us kind of like, okay, we need to give you more practical examples of what this could look like. So we've been working with parent groups, we've been working with teachers, we've been talking to principals, evaluation teams, and doing some presentations across the state to try and get feedback on what our proposal looks like, and then be ready to move into drafting the rule language. After that, it goes to public hearings. So I look at our job as getting everybody thinking critically about what could pass so that we get better criteria on the backside when we go to rulemaking. Rulemaking, when they take in, once the rule language is drafted, it's proposed legal language, and then we take comments. So MDE has to respond to every single comment that comes in, and we have to talk about whether our proposed change is needed and reasonable and address any questions that come in. So the smarter the questions are, the more chances we get to think through the intended and unintended consequences of what that rule language will be. So we're not taking it personally, we're looking forward to it. We just want to get on with it. So, but this is kind of where we are right now. So today, my goal is to get some interaction going and have you thinking back live with us about what our proposal is and what this could look like for all of us. Okay, so the next so I'm going to walk through the recommendations in this kind of process. And I've had to start adding this slide of like, this is not training. If it were training, it would be more interactive. We'd have examples, we'd have non-examples, we'd have practice opportunities for you. So this is not a training. This is more kind of getting your initial response and leaving you with something to think about so that you send us more good questions later and coming up. So first off, the recommended criteria starts with what's the process of identifying kids who are not achieving at grade level. So the first thing in criteria is saying, is the system effectively supporting students to meet grade level standards? So the general ed is responsible for doing this process already. READ Act has it really clearly defined in terms of the English language arts standards, in terms of we have screeners that tell us who's on track and who's not on track, starting in preschool, all the way up through grade 12. So we're talking about what's data is coming from that system to let us know that the kids are making progress. Do the data indicate that kids are they're growing, they're having growth in terms of the state standards and in terms of screening? So currently the system is being built to make sure that kids grow across a school year and they're progressing within the benchmarks or they're closing the gap to get on grade level. And then are the district and school disaggregating and looking at those action planning with those data? So each year fall, they look at the fall data and they action plan around what the results are to identify which kids need intervention, match those interventions and make upgrades to see student progress. And then we're breaking apart our progress to make sure that all groups can access and move forward accordingly. So we should not be seeing any disparities between kids who are second language learners, kids who are of historically underserved or marginalized populations. So we're looking at disaggregating that and making sure all kids are growing and that they're receiving the effective instruction. Because sometimes we see kids getting instruction, but it's not this specific group of kids. They're not making progress, or they're not getting the same amount of access or instruction. So this is the MNMTSS process that's being defined, that they're building. So special education learning disability will dovetail into that. So the first, we're going to do a comparative analysis of these processes. So criteria A is about, is there evidence of inadequate achievement for this student? So everybody else is making growth, but this student stands different. They're not growing. Is the achievement showing up in multiple measures? So we're not just going to take low performance on an MCA or poor grades. We're going to talk about what is the area of inadequate achievement, and do we have multiple measures? This is a federal requirement of evaluation, and it's not specific to any one of the eligibility criteria. Then we're going to look at, is the evidence of this child provided adequate and appropriate instruction? So this has always been in federal regulation since 2004. It was another chunk, but we're now reconnecting that, saying, was this student provided effective evidence-based reading instruction? So did that general ed instruction? We actually got a call from somebody who, not in this state, they were giving all of their first graders 20 minutes of decoding practice for reading instruction. It was like, that's not going to do it for a first grader. So if that is the methodology, we can't say this student has a learning disability just based on that data. So we're going to have to go deeper. So this is really the requirement that says this student participated in a system that was designed and following those evidence-based practices. So another law saying, hey, pay attention to READ Act, what READ Act's requiring, that the kids are getting evidence-based instruction, and it's following the practices that are shown to grow kids' achievement. And then we want to look at, does this child perform differently than comparable peer groups? In the past, we have seen some kids coming out of intervention systems, and if you're Black and of low economic status, you're 90% likely to go into special education. So the interventions for that group of kids are not being effective. There's not enough frequency or enough intensity to those interventions. So it's not about an individual kid. If 90% of the kids in that group go on to need special education. Are there places where we've cut back on our English language services and we're using special ed identification as a proxy for English language services? So we want to make sure that kids are making growth and progress. So this is really kind of what teams are going to be looking at when they're looking at criteria A recommendations. They're going to be answering some of these questions. So we're doing a comparative analysis in terms of this student's grade level performance against what the system is reliably generating. And if that student stands different than what is being reliably predicted, that student was more likely to have a learning disability, then be provided poor academic instruction or few opportunities to respond. So this is the kind of data that we're looking at. So in that criteria A, we're looking at direct measures of the standards. We're looking at MCAs. MCAs don't apply to all the standards. So this year, one of the things that's happening is the department with the English Language Arts Committee is writing performance level descriptors. So they're saying by first grade, this is what your performance needs to look like. And they're giving descriptions for that. So that means we can use other data to say, well, this screening tool measures X and Y, and that student is supposed to be performing at that level in first grade. So if my student is not performing at that level on the test, I can say, well, then they're not going to be performing at benchmark. So we have direct measures, we have descriptors that let us match this. So this is a little in the weeds, but anybody who's ever given a Woodcock-Johnson knows that Woodcock-Johnson that performance level doesn't match up with those standards. Sometimes you can miss 2 items and still seem to be passing on Woodcock, but you know that the grade level expectation is way higher than that. So even though they look like they're performing well enough, in reality they aren't. So we're trying to address that. So then we have some curricular benchmarks. So these are all considered direct measures of the standards, and those kids need to be below on those grade level standards. They might also be below on screeners, so FastBridge or DIBELS or the screeners that we're putting in place that also meet requirements for dyslexia. But we also need screeners in math, and we need screeners in language. So we're looking at screeners in all the areas of LD, not just in foundational reading skills. And then we're looking at other measures. So we're currently taking the field through an exploration of other measures of achievement that aren't just your standard Woodcock or your KTEA. They might be more kind of focused on either foundational reading skills, foundational math skills, writing skills, or the language skills you might need. She's undecided. Okay. All right. So there are 3 kinds of data you can use to determine whether a student's on grade level or not. Does that make sense so far? The challenge, the committee came up with 3 because you need more than 1. And we don't have MCA scores for kids in pre-K through grade 3. So that means that in some of those grades where we don't have MCAs or more direct measures, you're going to be down here. If we have standard expectations of where kids are supposed to be in kindergarten, first grade, and we're measuring those benchmarks, we're going to bring that data in. But for what you don't see on there, you don't see grades. You don't see participation. Those do not measure kids' achievement or those grade level expectations. But in the past, we have heard that teams say, oh, well, he can't be LD, his grades are too high. And that's most commonly in secondary, where, oh, he's doing okay on the MCAs, his grades are passing, but really the student can't really spell, and they're just barely getting by with their reading skills. They're not able to read on grade level, but their oral language skills are so high. And then when we have the speaking and listening standards, but until we get those performance level descriptors, we don't really have good grade level expectations of language, but it's coming. Questions or comments? Bet you get 2 questions because your questions are always really hard, so save it up.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to go to, is what you're...
This is what we're proposing to move to. Right. Yep. And so I want us to also think of a funnel system. So the first thing is, what is the student's grade level skills? These 2, I'm going to have data on before I ever write a referral. We'll have plenty of this data before we ever suspect that this is a disability and not just a lack of instruction. This third one would be gathered by a special ed evaluation team just to kind of tie it all together and put a bow on it, or to fill in gaps. So screeners are great for telling us, hey, there's some risk here, but it doesn't tell exactly what I need to work on. So an evaluation for special education should tell us what to work on next. So we want to have a greater picture of that. And then the committee said, look, these 60-page evaluation reports, they're not helpful to parents. People are getting lost in all the details of the data. So let's start following the evidence-based practice, which is show me this in visual form. Give me the graphs. Help me see how my students are performing to others. So we do have great reports for the MCAs. I get one for every time every year on my students' progress. Where are they progressing in the grade level standards? What skills are they moving forward on, and how are they compared to kids in my district, kids in my school, kids in their grade, and also the state. The STAR assessments are also pretty good. They even break it down to say these are the specific skills or questions the students didn't answer well and might be having difficulty on. So that data needs to come in. So we've started to mock up some decision trees. So I just want to start off saying, here's a student. Is there evidence of inadequate achievement in one or more of those standards? That's the same as the current criteria, no change here. Is inadequate achievement shown up on multiple measures? So we want we don't just trust, every test is a snapshot in time. So we want to have data that's kind of converging or showing us a complete picture that the student's below grade level. So if we said, yep, there's evidence and it's in one or more measures, so maybe I'm showing difficulty in reading and math skills. Then, is there evidence that I was provided appropriate evidence-based instruction? So now we go back to what my district was saying, are there kids in my grade level that are making appropriate progress? And so my achievement is unexpected to how much everybody else in my grade level or in my school is growing. So I stand a little bit different. And with that, we can, and also some measurement, we can see, am I getting evidence-based instruction? Am I making systematic, or are the teachers using the practices? Are they following a scope and sequence? Am I getting that exposure? Question.
Yeah, I'm very uneducated on the whole system and how it works in the school districts. But is the first one, the very top one, is that just based on the teacher's opinion?
No, there is data that's gathered. They're redesigning the systems to say there is data gathered. It is communicated through the MCAs annually that schools action plan with. The screening data schools are action planning with. Every school has to come up with a continuous improvement plan. Every school that's moving and doing this tiered system of supports has to look at these data. So all of these trainings are happening right now, and schools are working on getting better. So the system of data up here, this is in place. It's variable across the state, but it's in place and people are getting better at it. And this should happen whether we change criteria or not. This is supposed to have been in place and shouldn't change. READ Act has been designed to shore this up. READ Act has been designed to say structured literacy is a collection of evidence-based practices based on the reading research, and that's what everybody should be doing. And you should be selecting instructional resources that align with that and support the teacher to do evidence-based practice. The trainings that are required of all the educators right now, they're educating everybody on the research and trying to get people to select better materials and consistently follow those instructional habits. So this is what's going to be so not only is general ed measuring it, but if this rule goes into effect, when we sit down and we look at the individual, we're now holding general ed and interventionists accountable for what they said they were going to do. So if you didn't do what you say you were going to do, then there's some more teeth in it, because now there has to be an alignment across the system, and we don't just stand outside of it.
I have a question. How are you guys going to know that they're doing that?
How are we going to monitor this?
Yes.
So this isn't part of the recommendations, and this is why we have a contrast analysis. So as teams sit down, we're going to be looking at this data. This isn't data just sitting at some district planning meeting. Every time that we sit down and we look at evaluation of kids, we're looking at how are the rest of the kids progressing. And so there is some accountability of, like, these teams are measuring this. We're also, in part of the recommendations, is this process has to be spelled out. Every district has a procedure manual for how to be compliant with federal and state law. So every district has to spell this process out, and it has to be made public. And the data for this process will need to be made public so people can go back and say, how is my students doing compared to the rest? How do I know that students in the school are getting evidence-based instruction? So that's kind of the intention, so that there's some more accountability.
So if they have those plans, but then how do we know that they're actually performing those plans?
Well, again, I think
that's where we've lost them a little bit in the READ Act, is we have some really great laws for it, but how do districts that aren't going through with what they should be doing, how are we going to track that?
So that's where we want to see some data visualizations, where when you're looking at this individual's data, it's laid over top of group data. And the MCAs already kind of begin to show that. So you get to see a report showing where the kids in the school and in the grade level are, and then where your student is. And screening data will have similar reports. So we're just trying to make sure all of these reports end up in the evaluation process, because right now, evaluation teams don't ever really see those MCA graphs that you get at home, and that isn't part of the picture. They don't see necessarily the screening graphs and the holistic system data. So we're trying to build out more of the accountability systems, and it's tricky right now because we don't actually have rule language, we have drafts. So, like, do people build out to a draft, or do they wait to build out to the specific rule? But what I'm showing you is this is what our proposal is, so that when you get down to the evaluation team, it's not on the school psych to say the student met criteria. It's to look at the team, and the decision tree is if we start here, the students aren't functioning below grade level, well, they're not LD. And that's already required in federal law. So we're only moving kids through the system that are below grade level. Now, people are asking us regularly, well, is special ed going to define below grade level? And we're not going to do that because every school designs the system of support. So they tell you when you're not achieving well enough in kindergarten, and you're going to get an intervention on top of your general classroom. That's the first hint that students are below grade level. So by the time I get to winter, there should be evidence that I was provided really good grade level instruction and intervention. So there's another piece of this, that there's two places where the system has to prove that you are getting evidence-based instruction and intervention. Because I'm not yet suspecting my kindergartner of an LD just yet. He's just getting exposed to instruction. So we want to see how he's progressing. Okay, so related to this, in October, we came back and we talked about it, it's LD, and that's a federal definition. So federal law gives us different language than is currently being used. So we went and said, it's now called developmental language disorder. That translates to oral language and listening comprehension under LD. So we started making sure that, call it what you want, just don't call me late for intervention. So if people want to use developmental language disorder, that's also known as an SLD within oral language, a language achievement. These are the areas we really want to go through and make sure and process. And so we are paying attention to how are our kids' vocabulary developing? Do we have any markers that they're not able to use syntax or grammar correctly? So for kids who are having language difficulties, we should have screening data on these components. We should have screening data on their listening comprehension. And we now have evidence-based interventions that are being piloted in the state to say if kids are low in these areas in the preschool and in kindergarten, we're going to address these because this is the beginning cascade into literacy. If we have low oral language inputs, we cannot cascade into reading. So we need to build these on the front end. We're looking at kids' usage. And what many complaints are happening right now is kids are not talking. We are not having serve and return interactions, or we're not having these language exchanges like we used to. So there's a lot of early childhood, there's a lot of kindergarten teachers, first grade teachers saying kids aren't coming with the language skills they used to have. And it's not just vocabulary. They don't have world knowledge. They don't know how to express themselves in complete sentences. So our general ed teachers are learning more about the importance of oral language instruction. And some of our pilot partners in other states that are a little ahead of us are saying when they started doing language interventions in first grade, they saw kids' CBM's scores go up. So their words read correct per minute, which is typically a decoding indicator, those are increasing with more oral language practice on top of what they were getting with good decoding and encoding instruction already. So we know this is a big part of the mix, and we're finding kids already in special education that are not getting language instruction. So we're screening kids in language, or screening kids on IEPs that have with this data, and we're finding kids who need more explicit language interventions in special ed. So it's not just a general ed issue. But so you can go back and listen to our full talk. It's October. It was called the Big D Debriefing. You can access that on our state website. We are moving to building a system with our partners to screen for language and progress monitor and also do language interventions. They may not be well known yet, but they will be because we're all talking until we're blue in the face about this. Then we also have dyslexia. So this is where we're training special ed evaluation teams and getting lots of calls from middle school right now that how do I know what I'm paying attention to? So we are helping those middle school teams or fourth grade on up explain what the CAPD results are. So the CAPD Basics is the new state screener. And we're trying to help them figure out how that screening data matches to what they need to address with kids. So these are in handouts. Lisa, I'm pretty sure that the IHE also has those.
There's a scan code.
Okay. Okay. No, but I'm just saying we had these for higher ed because higher ed asked us to come in and talk to them about how to prepare their professionals to administer assessments and then write IEPs. So our next talk is after we talked to parents about this and said, yep, this is a helpful message. We've been training practitioners as they call in. Our next task this coming fall is to help people go from the screening data to writing present level statements and then writing goals and then figuring out how are they going to progress monitor those goals, because parents are really getting tripped up with, you say he has dyslexia and you're only measuring words read correct per minute on grade level. Like, but that's not the instruction he's getting. So there's like lots of vulnerabilities in this and helping parents understand what they're really looking at. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities in this, but the dyslexia is also SLD and foundational reading. And at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we're picking up the right kids and we're intervening. So just like many of you knew would happen, our middle schools are like, look at all these kids who have decoding problems. Look at all these kids who don't have morphology and their vocabulary is low. Yep. So they're screening, and that's all they got in place this year, because by the time the screening requirements went into place, the year had already started. All the adults were hired and plugged into the system. And so now parents have been calling MDE going, but they're not doing anything. And we're like, we know. They got the data, and then the system was not primed to let them figure out what to do with those kids. So they kind of had to go find the kids, and they're like a year behind. And parents aren't happy, and schools are like, what are we supposed to do? Like, we teach in departments. You're like, you have a year to figure this out. You have to figure out how you're going to help all these kids. You've been giving them a reading comprehension intervention, but they really need decoding. So staff development on multi-syllable word reading. Dyscalculia, apparently I've been saying that wrong for the last 20 years, so I will be learning new vocabulary myself. Dyscalculia is also about having a learning disability in math, and it's really foundational math skills. We've been working with a group to build out a specific training on how to identify dyscalculia and provide evidence-based math instruction to all of our special education teachers. The draft of that launches this. We're going to do some usability testing this spring and then try to get special ed teachers an interventionist improvement. Now, that's going to not sound satisfying, but guess what is happening in the field of math? They're having their science of reading moment. You've got the National Center for Math Teachers and Math Instruction coming out against evidence-based practices in math, saying, oh, well, we just don't agree on the evidence. It's like PTSD all over in math. So we're hoping that the math people learn without having to have the same come to moment that the reading group did, because we're all like too traumatized to do this again in another content discipline. So right now, we have found people, we are building out explicit instruction in math, and we are pairing with language specialists. So that training is developed with a language specialist who is also a speech pathologist. And I think people are gonna like it. The question is it deep enough? I mean, right now, everybody is so stretched. Getting teachers the deep training they need is being the hardest part. Reading comprehension is our next big bucket. We've learned some stuff. Guess what? We taught kids a whole bunch of strategies to find the main idea, but we didn't focus on the knowledge. So we have to build knowledge and the main idea. We've been working on structured literacy since 2019. I see less change in reading comprehension instruction than anywhere else in the system. Reading comprehension instruction in many places still looks like quizzing kids. It still looks like oral quizzing. And not explicit. So we are moving into this phase of a project of how do we get teachers to apply what they learned in structured literacy training. They think they're doing it and they're not. And one of the places they think they're really doing well is getting kids to talk and having discussions. The problem is they're not giving good feedback. Kids are not having to use words, the vocabulary words, in the way they've been given. So they're switching the endings to be ones they already know. So when I ask you to give a word back to me, you give it to me in a way that's more familiar to you instead of the way I ask you to give it. So we can tell kids aren't gaining all the vocabulary yet because they're not able to change the way a word is functioning to the new way we're introducing it. So swimming, like this is a bad example. But if I say, give me a sentence with the word swim in it, a student will say, I went swimming. You're like, oh, I need you to give it back in swim. We just watched kids building words. The one of the words that was in the that they could have generated was anti-vivisectionist. And the student said, oh, we came up with vivisectionist. And the teacher said, I'm not sure about the meaning of that. And it was a missed opportunity to make the student go, tell me how you think you know that's a word. Tell me how you put it in a sentence. So that missed opportunity to make sure kids can function with the language parts that they're learning is an opportunity. It's a missed opportunity right now. So until we change some of those things, I'm not sure we're going to see much of the benefits. So we're working on that. But we are looking at most of the challenges in the research right now say kids are struggling in upper grades with sentences. They're really not good at constructing sentences or deconstructing sentences for meaning. And the field right now is full of people who never got sentence instruction. The whole idea of how a word is functioning in a sentence, they learned to identify nouns, verbs, and adjectives. But they can't tell you how a word is necessarily functioning in a sentence and know that that helps answer a meaningful question. So either your PTSD because you went to a non-public school and you learned sentence diagramming till you were blue in the face, and you can label every part, but you can't talk about how you know that this piece tells you more about that other word or tells you the relationship of those ideas in a sentence. And then the last one is in writing. And the writing I put last because it is really kind of, you got to go through all the other processes. You have to learn not only all the oral language, but then you have to learn how to transcribe that into symbols and order all of that in the right way before you can get written expression. So that's still part of LD criteria. And dysgraphia isn't just about handwriting and that transcription. It's kind of all these components. We're still seeing in our system that not enough people are focusing on handwriting. There's a big, kind of switch or wrestling of like how much typing and how much keyboarding do I do, and then can I put cursive back in the curriculum? So every time we go to do a training, people are like, tell me about cursive, can we put it back? And then of course a lot of difficulty in spelling. So we were working with the district that the kids were knocking the phonics out of the park. So the teacher skipped all the dictation stuff. By the time they got to 4th grade, they were stuck. They couldn't spell any of the words, and they were having difficulty in some of the bigger words, and so the teachers had to drop back and do all the decoding curriculum with just all the dictation components. So we do know that if we don't practice both sides, the decoding and the encoding, kids are going to get stuck. And just because they can read doesn't mean they've learned their phonics as thoroughly as they need to. Okay, and then, I'm going backwards. Oops, sorry. Okay, Okay, so part B is really, so that was part A. That was a lot of part A. Part B is like, now I'm looking at progress monitoring. So where was my achievement? That's a lot of information. Where is my progress? So the system of interventions has to be designed so all kids will grow with intervention. It's not just go get you one. It has to further intensify off core instruction. They have to have evidence-based, and we're looking that kids through the system are making progress. So it used to be schools could have ADSYS funds or a certain pot of money to do interventions, and if 11 out of 12 kids went on to be evaluated for special ed, they were still intervening. Now it's like, if 11 out of 12 kids go on to be evaluated, it means that you didn't have a good intervention. The dosage wasn't right, or it wasn't a good fit. So you have to look at that data and show that the majority of kids are making progress with those interventions. And then I'm standing different. So my progress is lower than expected. How do we define expected? Well, it's lower than what we should be getting based on when it's done well, and lower than the rest of the group. We have to intensify interventions, and we've been doing a lot about that this year. Our division put together 4 talks on each topic on how to intensify instruction and intervention for word study, syntax, semantics, and then reading comprehension. So that we get our interventionists to do these things well. Intensify interventions, make sure they're matched, and make sure that they can compete, or they can continue to do those over time so that most kids are growing. So again, on criteria B, we've got a system of tier 2 or tier 3 supports, and now we're comparing my progress going forward, and were they where, you know, am I lower than what should be expected? And that's the last one that I think is tricky is, can the intervention be maintained or sustained? Because some of our interventions are really good, and some kids are going to need to bootstrap every year. So if I have a student who, even with highly effective, they're growing and they're growing, but they're going to need interventions for the rest of their time, that's probably a special education kid. And right now, I have on my desk a student who doesn't meet discrepancy, but she's been in Barton instruction 45 minutes a day for a year and a half. She is a student with a learning disability. Everything about the evaluation, all the descriptions, the observations showed the student needs one-on-one instruction. She's making progress. Her oral IQ is 120, 124, but her reading is down at 80. And through the way the teams organize data, she didn't meet discrepancy, which is why one of the reasons why we want to get rid of it. This student needs specially designed instruction, and so we're working with that group to try and figure out, like, you really have a student with a disability. Like, there has to be an override in the system because this child is not going to make it without special ed supports. So that's something that we currently can't address in this criteria, that we're going to be hopefully doing better with the next one. So where we're currently is the data that best defines the problem and rules is a primary cause. We're not yet consistent on that. Not everybody agrees on what measures of achievement we need to use, and we're not yet consistent with them. We're not screening yet in all 8 areas. So we're really good at screening for some foundational reading. We're building out screening for comprehension, but the system is not built out at the state level yet. We don't have the system for visualizing the data. So many special ed teams use a thing called SPED forms. That's where they put all their information in. Well, that doesn't allow you to add pictures. And when you add pictures, it takes up a bunch of memory. So they are working on building out how they're going to store that data and how to do it in PDFs. So all of these pictures can go in, ergo that people can use less words to describe that, and we get better decisions. And then there's a lot of discussion of why is special ed deciding not to define below grade level. IDEA says below grade level. IDEA says the purpose of special ed is to access and make progress in the grade level standards. And wherever we put that threshold, it's going to be about gatekeeping and not about the kid's progress. So the other thing is the MTSS system defines it more before special ed would. So we're working closely to kind of track this and see where this needs to go. But the committee, as well as others, say if we said you have to be 1.5 grade levels below, then we get back to exactly what we have now. What if I'm 1.48 grade levels below? I look exactly like the student who's 1.5. Well, oh wait, what if 1.48 means that everybody in that school qualifies? Well, it's a school-wide problem, it's not a disability. So there's reasons why these thresholds or these cutoffs were not in the new recommendations, and it's more about a system of like ruling out other explanations and showing habits of service. How is this feeling? This is feeling really technical and weedy for this group. I'm like, it's going, what was I thinking? We also have spent time working with the University of Minnesota to come up with some technical guidance on progress monitoring, and we are going to be running a study on progress monitoring. How many districts, what does it take to put good progress monitoring practices in place for intervention? Where do you get stuck? Where do you need more support? So we're picking pilot sites of districts to go and do some of this work. So one of the tools they have is here's a little checklist. They also have here's the tools that we'll use that enable you to follow the LD guidance. So they're putting these things in place. They're going to be training people to make these graphs. And I see one of the things I put in to fix this, this is fancy language for I changed the intervention and intensified it. So we're looking at how do districts get these generated for every student. Some of it is, some of our districts are just living off spreadsheets. They're small and they're rural and they don't have the fancy data systems that the bigger districts have. So our contractor is working to build out or identify tools that will automatically generate this. So there won't be an excuse of, well, I don't know how to do that, I'm not trained, or I can't do it. And so we're trying to make sure that these get generated with all the best practices. So we have the days or weeks in intervention, We have the measure. What am I measuring? We have a good goal line. So this goal is reasonable and it's predicted based on the research and based on how other kids are performing. And then I can see how this individual kid is performing. So we've already seen from some other states some vulnerabilities there. We're designing some technical assistance, and we've got our university partners helping to do some of that work. They're also going to look at the growth goals for kids in different of different backgrounds and of different groups, because right now the expected goal line and the expectations of our screening and progress monitoring says if you get large enough groups, you're going to be accurate. Well, some of the nuances in the cultural context that happen for groups of kids get lost when you use big numbers. So she's doing a study to look at our African American kids and our Native American kids. Do those benchmarks actually predict when that group will meet proficiency or be on grade level, or do they have to have different set points, so that you're making decisions that ultimately have accurately identified all the kids based on where they end up, not just based on what the largest number of people need. So that seems super weedy as well. But trying to make this easier for districts, trying to automate as much as possible so that when they get to the new criteria, we know how to solve these problems, and we've worked out the kinks before people are mandated to use them. So then if you've picked the good evidence-based practices and you use those progress monitoring practices, we'll at least have charts and graphs that everybody can follow. We'll be able to look at the comparisons of my child to the other kids in the group. And I'll be able to say that the intervention was evidence-based. They followed the 6 components of that. They followed intensification. And my student stands different. Then the last question is, can this progress be maintained? Or do every time I take a long weekend, every time I go on break, I have to regain what I've lost? Or is this so intensive that we're going to need to keep doing this? There are schools that are doing Wilson reading in general ed as part of their intervention and Wilson reading in special ed. So where is the student going to need that Wilson system? Are they going to move too slow in that intervention group? And they maybe need to be in with a special ed teacher who's going to keep going and maybe move a little bit slower. So it's not the discrepancy anymore. It's more about kids who require special education. And I think about the parents, or those of you who, that parent is getting the student tutoring, and that doesn't seem to count. But when you look at a student who's getting 120 minutes of reading, and maybe they're getting structured literacy already, and you've gotten them Barton tutoring, that student is getting special education. Only you're paying for it through a second mortgage. So what we're looking at here is all the data. When we put all the data together to see how kids progress, we want to reflect what it's really going to take to move the student forward. So we're looking at progress monitoring data from community places that are evidence-based and delivered with fidelity. Those can count towards eligibility determinations and be part of that picture of basically you are giving the student special education already. So these 3 things are kind of where we're at now. Intervention-based, can we maintain it? And does the child perform differently? So I want to move to that. The biggest question from everybody right now around interventions, how do we know they're based on the data and matched to needs? So we've been moving to really digging in deep to this kind of phases of learning. And how many of you guys know what UFLY is? Okay, so UFLY is the University of Florida's literacy intervention. They have good phonics. UFLY was designed that I would do 2 days of explicit instruction on a sound, O-U-O-W sound. So I know what the sound is, it's spelled 2 ways. They're going to introduce me to that for 2 days. After 2 days, I'm going to know it. Now we can move on to me being able to fluently know how to read that sound when I come up to it, and then how to spell it. In Minnesota, we have several districts that go in, 2 days is not enough with UFLY. And so we're saying general ed teachers, you're not done teaching until the kids can do it at the end of the day and recognize it, do it the next day. So we're talking already in general ed about where you're teaching to the stage of learning, not to the instructional resource. And that's a big deal because people are like, well, UFLY doesn't have mastery checks in it. Well, districts are putting mastery checks in. So these kind of tools are what we're putting in. We're helping teachers recognize that if we're not accurate at 85 by the end of the day or the end of the session and we don't recognize it tomorrow, I'm still teaching an acquisition. And there's strategies I need to use, and I need to have permission and be encouraged to go back to do that. So there are 4 phases. There's acquisition, and the instructional match is greatest, or most important. It's secondary. A lot of people went out and bought rewards curriculum or Read 180. Read 180 doesn't address decoding and morphology, so they don't have a good match. The CAPTE screener measures word reading, decoding, morphology, and vocabulary. And as kids show up with lower scores on those, they know that they don't have a good match. So those screeners are helping people recognize that intervention doesn't help kids who are here with what they need. At the fluency phase, so our kids with dyslexia are going to struggle with reading fluently, even when they're accurate on their decoding. So some of our kids, the most impacted kids, are still going to struggle with reading with emotion and reading with prosody. So we're going to be working on how do this happen. In general ed, we're seeing that teachers are sometimes over-teaching phonics and not pushing this. Their voice boxes are too loud when we're reading chorally, when we're reading sentences together. So my voice is carrying the kids and I can't tell if they're reading quickly and with emotion or not. So we're still having to figure out how to get teachers to actually teach fluency correctly, not over-teach, but also turn their voice boxes off, making sure kids get adequate practice for that across the day. So we have these are just the little tools that we're putting in teachers' hands. And I'm hoping that it also helps parents go, oh, yeah, when I'm reading with my child, I know what disfluent means, or I know what some of these big words are. Then I think this is a mismatch of skill or teachers not fading the scaffolds and thinking the kids can do it. This one in generalization, so I've learned the OW, OU, but then I don't practice spelling words that are rule breakers. I don't get enough practice with new to me words. So like the spelling things that we used to do where we give you 10 words and we test you on the 10 words at the end. Nope, not doing that. We're introducing the words, we're reading them, we're spelling them all the week. And then we're going to keep introducing new words and we're going to give you the rule breaker words. Or we're going to tell you, oh, that word doesn't follow it because it's not an English word. So we're going to be talking about that. And this is where in the past we've stopped teaching too soon, where everybody gets feeling, oh, I fell behind on my pacing, I got to move forward. So I don't teach this phase, and then I don't teach the adaptation phase. And in math instruction, some of our folks start here. I'm going to give you a new scenario, and I'm going to let you wonder about it and think about how what we just learned applies to this new scenario. And humans are not primed to do that. You have to have lots of deep knowledge and experiences to go from an adapted problem or just a real word problem and then back into a algorithm that you're going to use. So some of our instruction has still got to get reorganized to take kids from the acquisition to this last phase. So every tier of instruction gets this. This is going to be what we're looking at. Did the kids who get intervention that show up in evaluation, did they get instruction at their appropriate phase of learning? And we can look at that by the errors. We can look at that at how quickly they read, and we can also look at that at what happens when they get maybe nonsense words or when they get words that are new to them but follow the pattern. All right, that was super weedy. I think I lost a few people. Questions? Okay, yeah.
I have one. So you said they're gonna be piloting some of this stuff in some districts.
We've got pilots all over the place. This year, all of our ADSYS, the program that does Tier 2 interventions, ADSYS funds are the system support funds. I'm having a middle-age moment. Anyway, 400 districts out of 500 get funds for that program to do tiered interventions. So we have been teaching all year this concept with each unit of language of how to adjust instruction for that. So there are different places of doing that.
Okay, that kind of answered my next question. So I was gonna say, how do you pick what districts are doing it and how many are doing it?
Our team has some groups, some districts we picked back in 2019. We're going to follow them for 10 years because that's teaching us a lot. Some of them are opting out. Some of them are like, yeah, we don't need you anymore. We got this. And we're like, maybe. And we're going to keep going. But we are monitoring different places across the state. So we have a sense of like what's happening across the state. Our MNMTSS team that trains on how to do, trains on tiered supports, they're taking up this language and they're building the same thing into all of their training. So hopefully people are going to look at that and go, oh yeah, we know that, because they're getting it from multiple people at multiple different points in time. It's not happening yet. We're on the process.
So on the SLD criteria, are we sticking with the discrepancy? I mean, what you showed us was information that's going to the team. Yes?
What I've showed you is the recommendations, what they're based on and what it means, that the data people have to look at. We got hung up in rulemaking.
Once they're evaluated, or is this all before they're evaluated?
This is data that would be gathered. These are instructional supports that should happen before we suspect disability. So our job is to say, team, if you've seen this data, or as this data comes to you, here's how you decide that the student has an LD versus this is a system failure. So when back in the first,
The data would have been collected.
the data will be collected as the student goes through.
Yeah, and then for all students.
Yep.
Yeah, and then now the referral's been made for an evaluation or not? When does that happen?
I didn't put this into a timeline. So, all right, as a timeline, Vicki starts school. She's in general ed instruction. In September, she gets screened to see where she's at. She doesn't know all her letter names and all her letter sounds. So, but that's okay because she's getting some really good instruction from a school that's doing evidence-based practices. They're using functional phonics or bridge to read. Vic's getting that good instruction every day. She gets another 15 minutes of additional phonics instruction as a tier 2 intervention. So we know we know her screening data. We know some progress monitoring data for interventions. So it's now six weeks into school. Vic is starting to respond. Her graph is going up. She started to learn more of her letter sounds. The instruction that she's getting is showing that it's sticking. We're not as worried about Vicki. We have another student who's like, they're starting to stall out. Let's do additional supports, or let's modify that intervention to kind of double dose on some of those sounds that seem to be pretty tricky. So we're going to increase the number of practice opportunities. We're going to make sure there's more corrective feedback. We're going to make sure there's a see it, say it, write it. We're going to add the number of opportunities every session to make sure that that's working. So we've intensified the intervention. And so we'll monitor that and see if that starts to spike it. So somewhere late fall, we're going to start seeing some kids for whom other kids are responding. Vicki's responding, other kids in the group are responding, but Patty seems to be struggling. That seems to not be enough. Or she's doing okay, but we need to keep an eye on it. Let's keep checking in and seeing if that graph is continuing to grow. She goes on break, comes back. It's like she's never seen it. Now we're more worried and we might move into evaluation. So now we can take all the data we gathered on Patty, the screening data, the curricular benchmark data, the progress monitoring data, and I can put it through the lens that I've been walking you through. And now we might be able to say, hey, we suspect Patty has a disability and she's going to need something more intensive, ongoing than what we've already been doing.
But are we still using a discrepancy to qualify her?
Under the recommendations, when these are all in place, we will not be using discrepancy. Currently, schools have two choices. You can use the discrepancy or you can do the system that I'm talking about, and they can use that criteria already.
And what do you think the percentage are that are not using discrepancy?
Not many. I think people are getting closer to using it for foundational reading skills, but not all areas, and not district-wide or system-wide. And as budget cuts hit, and as people look at cutting $300 million from SPED, and possibly ADSYS, then that's threatening the integrity of the system. So,
So we'll go with maybe heads nodding, and our experience in the field is that most schools are still depending on the discrepancy model. And where is, if I missed, I walked in a few minutes late, where are we in that process? We got hung up
we're stalled.
and
We need the legislature needs to extend rulemaking authority back to MDE to finish drafting and to go to public hearing.
And is that going to happen this session, do we think?
I have heard nothing. I have heard nothing.
So we may just sit here for another year or two? I mean, just information.
Yeah. No, unless the legislature extends rulemaking authority, we live with the discrepancy model until it happens. The work that we've been working on stays dormant.
I haven't heard any discussion about this at the legislature.
I just testified for actually some of this, so. Yeah, it is being talked about, but it is stalled. It is
Okay.
stalled. Like, the bills aren't moving forward right now.
And I heard that there was like 190 educational bills they were trying to process this session, which is, there's a lot. And there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of people who want to claw back some of the stuff that's already had because they feel really squished. So I do,
The schools start feeling really squished.
yeah, I think everybody's feeling squished at how many things are happening.
Well,
So,
a lot of the pushback is that, from my experience from being down there, is that there is mandates being put on schools, but there's no funding for those mandates. So when you're saying we want this data, well, how can you get that data without funding it and hiring more teachers or specialists to be able to do it? I mean, that's my understanding from the work
Right.
I've been doing down there. So.
Well, thank you, that's helpful.
in my attempt to show this is really when we go back to, if we want to change criteria, you have to build this system first. This is your MNMTSS system. We can't afford to do this the way we've already been doing it. Like, we cannot afford as a state to not put MTSS in place, because because we can't have schools where 60% of the kids aren't doing step one. And that it just depends on whether you have money to do step two. We can't continue that if you're in 5th grade, I only have enough humans to give you phonics 15 minutes a week.
And as soon as you bounce I know we've all shared these experiences, but I'm seeing kids that are bouncing up over and above the line. You know, the school has the cut point, and the kids get some intervention and they bounce up. And then they say, oh, well, you graduated. We're taking in the next group of 6 kids or 10 or 20. And then you know, they do the next
Right.
reading, and now they're down. And they bounce back.
And that's where I kind of come back to that. We're not teaching to the generalization phase. So we're stopping intervention too soon. Like, we're not teaching that. Or we picked interventions that have been touted, like, great, U-Fly is great. And if you follow it slavishly, you will not get the results that whoever designed that is going to get. We're not getting far enough with people slavishly following a curriculum or a resource. So fidelity doesn't mean that specifically. Fidelity means adjusting to the phase your student's at and intensifying it. So, I mean, we were observing in classrooms where the teacher's doing her best, and it was an assessment day, and we had 4 kindergartners on the floor screaming, crying because they couldn't do the skill because the curriculum was moving too fast. We had a student who was engaging in very challenging behavior out of frustration. And so it wasn't worth it. Like, we need systems to help teachers be accountable to doing the thing, but not handcuff them to something that's not working, and handcuff them to a pace that's not meeting their students' needs. So,
And then I don't know what that other piece is, but the piece about, is the student getting, I mean, that's like the piece that's on your desk. If a student is getting outside intervention, how is that going to be considered? You know, they're getting Barton tutoring or whatever they're doing.
so what I liked about
That has the outside evaluation.
what I liked about the recommendations from the team, as long as those folks are bringing in those best practices, and you have data from, like, if it's an evidence-based intervention that's being delivered as it would be in school, and that student's not, that's what it's taking, then you have evidence that that student is getting the equivalent of special ed. So like we're looking for places where the projected recommendations or rule would be, so that that data can't be excluded. And the other thing is, the parents get a right to a second opinion or an independent evaluation. If you can't bring in other intervention data, what happens to maintaining that right? So, I mean, those are things the committee really did wrestle with, of like, IDEA has to be implementable with this new criteria. The criteria can't just be solely dependent on what's happening without the opportunity for additional information or another opinion. So we're 5 minutes over, and I've been told the worst thing you can do is hold people over, but I apologize for just like, I'll stay and talk to anybody as long as you need. But
Thank you.